Was this figure inspired by this dream? And if so, why wasn't it accurately portrayed? Why didn't he portray it like it was in his dream, do you suppose? Any thoughts? Say it again. He is the golden child, right? He was the head of gold. Okay, good. Bill? That's good. Exactly. Good. Yes, Jen. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. You don't want to... Right. You don't want to plant the seed of maybe discontent or rebellion or whatnot. Good, good. Another idea is maybe he rejected the idea that his kingdom was to be supplanted. You know? I mean, your kingdom's not going to last long. Well, I'm going to make this figure of gold, and yeah, maybe the last one. Maybe he's rejecting that idea. But at any rate, this is what he built. It seems in verse 2 and 3 that all the government officials were summoned. So you look, and this is quite an extensive list of government officials that were, everybody was summoned. And it seems that no one was left out. So the initial understanding is that we're going to dedicate this image that was made. And it's basically a statue. Has anyone here been at a dedication of a statue at one time or another? I have a couple. It's kind of cool. I mean, it's behind the curtain, then you pull the curtain, and you act, oh, wow. So, yeah, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that statue, dedication. So everybody goes, including Daniel's friends, and there's no reason not to go. Nothing wrong with that. However, in verse 4, we see there's kind of a twist. The purpose of the gathering is announced. It was more than a dedication. It's a call to worship. The moment that you hear the sound of these musical instruments, you are to fall down and worship this image. So is this unusual as far as how people worshipped back in that day? The answer is no. People worship idols all the time, and this is just another idol. This is another god. The king's commanding me to worship it, so the natural thing is, why not? It's just another god. How many are there, right? So he's asking them to worship this thing. Interestingly, this is going to actually be repeated in Revelation. So if you want to hold your place there, turn to Revelation chapter 13. And we see that this is going to actually be repeated in the future. In Revelation 13, and we'll chapter 13, verse 14, this is talking about the false prophet, beast of the earth. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which it was given him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who had the wound of the sword and has come to life. And it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast could even speak and cause as many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. So this is going to take it a step up. This beast, this image in Revelation, which is yet future, will actually have the ability to speak and do some sort of action. Now, back in the day, even back earlier in my days, you thought maybe this is just going to be demonry, demon influence. But nowadays, we look at things, we have computers and AI, and it's easy to imagine that they could make a robotic type of image with artificial intelligence that could do these things. So it's just interesting how you see technology kind of catch up to the Bible, as it were. Very, very interesting. So here you are among this group of people, probably hundreds, if not thousands of people on this plain. It's a huge plain, 6 miles by 6 miles. This image is in front, and imagine the peer pressure that these three friends must have felt. The peer pressure that in just a moment, these instruments are going to sound, everybody's going to bow down. Well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? I mean, everybody's going to bow down, and they are. Are we as people pretty susceptible to peer pressure? Very much so. It's surprising. I was reading at one time some experiments that were done where they were having a classroom and they'd have students come in. There's 10 students, and 9 of the students were told there's going to be a mathematical problem on the board, and it's a multiple choice, A, B, and C. The real answer is C. But these 9 students that are being talked to, they're going to raise their hands at A, even though it's obviously wrong. So you get all the students in the room, and the instructor talks about the problem, and what's the correct answer? They say A, and all the students' hands go up, except number 10, who goes, he's looking around, and more often than not, they raise their hand too, even though it was plainly obvious that the answer was wrong. And that goes peer pressure to everything else. It goes to our susceptibility to follow the crowd in different ways, and sinful activity, drugs, etc. We are very susceptible to peer pressure. Go ahead, Peggy. And just in case you don't feel bad about yourself, why are we always pictured as sheep in the Bible? Exactly right. Because, it's not so bad, but, we are sheep, right? We're not the brightest colors in the box, as it were. Well, anyway. And also we have music. So this is undoubtedly a gathering of the Babylon Philharmonic Orchestra. You have all these instruments presented, and I'm willing to bet they're the best instruments and the best musicians. I mean, this is the king, so he's going to have the best of everything. How does music influence us? Bill? Yeah. Is he in the room? Yeah? Yeah. Right. Because you want to drive a little faster, right? Yeah. Or you get Kevin's bass up here. You want to start? You play faster, a little faster, and Joe has to say, "Jeff, slow down." Exactly. And also, we're very much influenced by patriotic music. For example, you have our national anthem or music that inspires us that way. You have different things that inspire us in church, music with words that inspire us. So yes, music is very influential. Now you're going to couple this peer pressure with this probably gorgeous worship music. So you have all these things that are zeroing in on everybody, but especially these 3 friends. So here's a question. Why is Nebuchadnezzar doing this? Doesn't he already have the loyalty of the people? Why is he going through this? What would you think? What purpose does it serve? Peggy? Stroke his own ego? Okay. Dave? They begin to believe their own press. Explain yourself, Dave. Okay, good. Anyone else? Maybe he's not so sure he had everybody's obedience. Good, good. Another common characteristic of a tyrant is that he wants it all. He wants your worship as far as secular is concerned. And a real tyrant wants your loyalty religiously as well. He wants everything. There'd be nothing better for a tyrant to not only have control of you in this world, but to believe that he has control over you in the world to come. That's a beautiful thing if you're a tyrant, right? And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing he wants influence on the religious institutions of his people. North Korea, when they became a communist nation, one of the first things they did was outlaw Christianity, and they went on a hunt for all the Christians they could find. They went to tell you how despicable they were. In the classrooms, they would hold up a Bible, and they would say to the students, the little kids, "Does your mom and dad have a book like this in their home? If they do, can you please let us know?" And kids are kids. And when they found those books, these people were sent to either executed or sent into prison camps, and they outlawed it all. So Kim Il Ding Dong, whatever his name is, he wants all the worship. Nothing to go to anyone else but him. Now, have we seen some borderline tyrannical acts in the last couple of years in our nation? What tyrannical acts have you seen? Near tyrannical acts. What have you seen? COVID, right. They made a big deal out of COVID. Now, I've said before, I give them the benefit of the doubt in the beginning, because no one knew at the beginning what this stuff is all about. And so you're hoping that they're wanting the best for everybody else. But later, when it became obvious that it wasn't what it was going to be, what it was said to be, and then they find out more information like maybe the vaccine isn't helping as much as it should, did they change? No, they kept on pushing and doubling down. Wear a mask, don't go to church, and if you do go to church, sit 6 feet apart and don't sing. Those are some of the things, because government wants to have control over everything. So you see these tyrannical acts that are enacted, and even a republic can be subject to that. In verse 6, we see what's going to happen if you disobey. Think about the COVID thing and stuff. What happened when you disobeyed there? You may lose your job. I know several people who lost their jobs because of that. What else? What if you are bold enough to say something on social media like, I'm not sure about the efficacy of the vaccine? Fake news. Linda got banned a couple times for Steve. Uh-huh. Yeah. The complete opposite of what we should have in our republic is that we should have, that should be a heroic thing, pointing stuff. Say again? Ah, yeah. Yeah, they did, didn't they? So he's in good company in that regard. Yeah, Jen. The worship. Right, exactly. The worship of the approved science, like Galileo again, or Copernicus, right? Yeah. So, but for this situation, we see the same thing. We have this image. Now, you're going to worship this image. Now, what happens if you don't? Well, I know you all will, but just in case you don't, we got this furnace over here that we're going to drop you in, and we're going to burn you to death. Tyrants hate to be disobeyed, and we're going to see that here. To disobey equals a fiery death. Now, this was not unusual for the Babylonians. Again, hold your place in Daniel and flip back a little bit to Jeremiah. And in Jeremiah 29, Jeremiah is actually making a prophecy here about a couple of people who have been false prophets. In Jeremiah 29, verse 21, it says, Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, concerning Ahab, the son of Koliah, and concerning Zedekiah, the son of Messiah, who are prophesying to you falsely in my name, behold, I will deliver them into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and he will slay them before your eyes. Because of them, a curse will be used by all the exiles from Judah who are in Babylon, saying, May the Lord make you like Zedekiah and like Ahab, whom the king of Babylon roasted in the fire. The Code of Hammurabi actually has several crimes which are punishable by being burned to death. And one of them is treason, which, of course, Nebuchadnezzar would look at this as treason if you're not following his direction. So, Taryn, are you back there? Can you put those pictures up, or one of the pictures up for me? So I actually got on the internet and put on there for furnaces from Persia. And so this is, I don't know if this is the actual furnace or if this is a replica, but this is kind of what's believed to have been the type of furnace that would have been used at that time. It would have been larger, obviously, because you're going to have 3 or 4 people in it. But you can see it's constructed of brick. You have an open outlet, and we think that that's probably where they would have been thrown in this outlet. And the bottom you have an inlet, which if you are smelting ore for iron or whatever, you could insert it there, or when the fire's done, you can pull out the ashes there. So that's kind of a good idea of what you're looking for. Can I see the next one, Taryn? And we think this is a little bit more what we'd be looking at. You can see it's larger. Thank you. It's larger, and you can see that they had to come off the top to be a ramp or something, which they would go to the entrance and put the people, in this case, put the people in. And you'd have an opening in the bottom that you actually could see into, and we're going to see that's going to come in handy in just a second. And the last one there too, if you would, Taryn. And this is the inside of the furnace. Now, the inside you can see, it's probably hard to see, but it's all brick and mortar. And crazy, that's not changed at all. I mean, like, I worked at an oil refinery for 3 years, and in that refinery, we had several furnaces that were huge. They were probably, half the size of this church. And they were fueled by bunker fuel, and you could look inside, you'd look inside the furnace through these openings to make sure the burners are all working, but you could see pretty clearly, and it's just like this. It was made of brick and mortar to insulate. So furnaces haven't changed a whole lot over the centuries. So thanks, Taryn. I appreciate that. The question everyone asks, where is Daniel? Where is he? I mean, no one knows. I know Bill kind of alluded to that last week, that he may have been back at Babylon running things. He may have been on a journey or something like that, because he is second in command, as it were, but he apparently is not there. We know for a fact that if he was, he would have been included with these 3 friends. There's no doubt about it. Now, who wrote this? Who wrote this particular story? Daniel. Right. So Daniel was fully aware of it. He knew it happened, and he's the one that actually recorded it. So here's another thought. What purpose does this serve for it to be written? What purpose does this narrative serve? I know it's to glorify God, absolutely. But why else would it be written? Would there be another reason, do you think? Peggy? Say it again. He is with us faithful. Good, that's exactly right. Good. God is. One of the ideas I had was, it shows that these 3 folks, they're not lightweights. You can almost get the idea when you read Daniel at the beginning. Daniel has this idea, and the other 3, oh, that's good, maybe they just go along with it. No. These 3 people also had backbones of steel. Okay? These people were faith giants in and of themselves, even if Daniel's not there. So it's to show them what they're made of. Okay, so what happens next? Let's read verses 8 through 18. Kellen or Lori? Verse 9. Okay, Lem or Daniel? Verse 12. to Teresa, if you don't mind, verse 18 there. Yeah, doesn't it kind of give you kind of a thrill, that last sentence there? That's pretty amazing. I get goosebumps listening to that. Okay, so we see certain Jews did not worship. We mentioned before at the beginning that when Nebuchadnezzar deported these friends, Daniel and his friends, he undoubtedly transported many more. So these weren't the only ones there. And apparently, whoever's making the accusation is making mention of that. He's saying certain Jews did not worship. Okay, so not all the Jews, but certain Jews. And of course, they are named. Now in verse 8, who's making the accusation? Who do we see? Yeah, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, right? So does that raise a red flag in anybody's mind? Have these astrologers had any interaction with Daniel before? Yeah, he saved their lives, right? Remember, they were all going to be put to death, and Daniel, the Lord gave Daniel the dream and the interpretation, and the first thing he said when he had that was, don't kill the wise men. Okay, so he actually intervened. He could have just said, yeah, kill them all, and we'll start with me and my 3 friends, and imagine the kingdom that will be. But he didn't. So chances are, some of these are the same people that Daniel already saved, which is kind of demonic, isn't it? Kind of awful. And what else may have been motivating the Chaldeans? What else may have been influencing them to have this attitude? Say it again? Anti-Semitic, correct? Dave? Exactly right, yeah. Who are these youngsters, right? Exactly. So there's jealousy probably involved as well. So it could be anti-Semitism, could be jealousy. But Nebuchadnezzar, to his credit, doesn't just unload. He is pretty upset. He has rage and anger, which, if you're a tyrant, it's not good to make him very angry. But he was pretty upset. But he did the good thing. He conducts an investigation. So he calls them in verse 14, and he says to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I set up? So, in spite of his anger, he does an investigation. He wants to see if it's true. And also, he's got some time and energy and money invested in these people. And they've probably been exemplary in their service. So there's all sorts of reasons why he wouldn't want to have to put them to death. So he offers them in verse 15 a second chance, which is amazing. It shows that Nebuchadnezzar does value them. Now we're going to do this again, and when you hear the orchestra warming up, I want you to bow down like everybody else. So you have a second chance. And it's interesting, who are the competitors here in verse 15? There's a competition going on. Who are the competitors? Say it again. The locals versus the foreigners? Yeah, that's true. Jen? So those are the two. Who is the God, your God, who can deliver you out of not my God's hands, my hands? So the competition is between Nebuchadnezzar and between their God. And Nebuchadnezzar thinks he holds all the cards. In verse 16, it almost sounds like Shadrach are being disrespectful, but I don't think they are. O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. My thinking is we don't need a second chance. There's no need to go to all that trouble because we're not going to obey. We're not going to worship your statue. And we're not going to try to talk our way out of it. We're not going to give all sorts of excuses and whatnot to try to get out of it. We're just not going to do it. So they're straight shooters, and they don't need a second chance. And verse 17, you got to love it. Our God is able. They have no lack of faith. They realize that God is able to do that and more. And then I love the fact that there's no presumption here. But even if he does not, was there a guarantee for them that God would deliver them? And the answer, I think, is no, because they wouldn't have added that part. If they knew for a fact, like if God had prophesied to their minds that he would deliver them, they wouldn't have added that part, even if he doesn't, because they would have stood on that. No, but even if he doesn't, so there's no presumption going on here. They know he can, but maybe he won't. Why might he not? For what reasons would the Lord choose not to deliver them if he didn't, you suppose? I see that hand. Steve? You know, I've actually been in a furnace and come out alive, but I had all sorts of gear and breathing equipment and whatnot, right? Yeah, so, but that's a great question, though. You know, the thought is that I had, if God chose not to deliver them, what's been proven? Their faith is genuine. They didn't turn away. You know, for many years when I was younger, I wouldn't voice this out loud because you're not supposed to say things like this, but I thought it was almost unfair that the apostles all died a martyr's death. I mean, really, all of them. Some of them pretty horrific deaths, you know. The one that sticks out in my mind the most is being filleted to death while you're alive. You know? And I thought to myself, why, God, if anyone deserves an easy time, if anyone deserves to be blessed to die in their sleep at old age, it's these people. They followed you forever. However, what did they prove by going through that? It's true. It's true. How many of us would die for a lie? If I ever have to, I hope I have the courage to die for the truth. But I'm sure not going to die for a lie. I could see one of the apostles, if this was a lie, no, you thought I was real. No, that's all fake. We made all that up. Can I go now? No, you have to stay. You know, they didn't, none of them reneged. And we're talking about 10 of the last 11 who died the martyr's deaths. And none of them gave up because they knew it was real and they based their life on it. And if Daniel's friends didn't get delivered, it would have been the same principle. But it's even better than that in this case. Go ahead, Bill. Yes. Yes. Exactly right. Excellent. All right, we're to leave off with verse 19. Where was that at? Okay. Verse Steve there. All right, thank you. So, the unsurprising reaction of Nebuchadnezzar, he's now filled with wrath. So, he was angry, but now he is confronted, the tyrant is confronted with those who are saying no, which they don't usually react terribly well to. Why is he so upset? He cannot force them to obey. I mean, he could lop their legs off and they fall over, right? But he doesn't have complete control, and it drives him insane. He just can't stand it. This can't be tolerated. Besides, if this is allowed to continue, what's liable to happen? More people might get this courage, and more people might rise up, and it might be a threat to his kingdom, right? So we can't let that happen. I will make the punishment so severe that if anyone has that thought go through their mind, this image will pop up and they won't do that. So he's going to make it really, really, really bad. So he says we're going to give him some extra heat this time. So he says to heat this thing up 7 times hotter. Now, they didn't have gauges back then, so obviously, they wouldn't know. But the idea is heat that baby up as hot as it can go. Now, remember, these people had some good technology. They were smelting bronze and iron, etc. So a furnace has to be how hot to smelt iron? Does anyone know? Well, at least 2,000 degrees, right. So at least 2,000 and above to smelt iron and to hammer it and to change it into steel. So you're talking, this is really, really hot, obviously. And it also says in verse 20, they were tied up securely. Now, they're tied up so much that you're going to see that there's going to be men carrying them up the ramp. So they can't walk. They are thoroughly bound and tied up, and they're by his strongest men. Was that necessary, do you think? No. I mean, he could have used anybody to tie them up, but he's painting this picture, right? This is part of the terrible thing that will happen to you if you choose to disobey like these men. We're going to tie you up so you can't even move. Also, there's no regard for the clothing. Now remember, back in ancient times, clothing was a big deal. It's not like me that can go to Costco and get a pair of jeans for $13, and they're great, by the way. Anyway, back then, all clothing is handmade, and it costs a lot of money. A lot more of your money would be spent for clothing than we spend today. And these guys are upper echelon government people, so they probably have some pretty nice clothes on, but they're not regarding that. They don't remove these clothes to save them. Nebuchadnezzar is so upset, he's just going to tie them up completely the way they are. In verse 22, as we think that as they're bringing these men up this ramp to toss them into the opening, we see that the fire actually killed the men who were carrying these people. You ask yourself, now how can that be? Some years ago, the fire department that I worked at, we had a steel foundry in our jurisdiction. Huge, acres underneath one roof. We had the most amazing calls there. Which, if I say amazing or cool, the fire department, means it's tragic for somebody else. But anyway, so we had a call there one time where the roof caught fire. There was an explosion inside the plant. The roof's on fire. They thought it was out, but me and my firefighter were going to go ahead and find a way to the roof so that we can make sure it's out. Otherwise, we come back later. So as I'm walking, I'm walking, and just me and my firefighter and Dave, and I look, and there's kind of this walled area. Okay, why? Because I'm looking for a ladder that's attached to the inside of the building. And as I walk into this room, it's like, whoa, I'd never felt so much heat before. In fact, the impression I had was that the heat picked me up and moved me. I don't think it did, but it felt like the heat moved me. We went behind the wall again, and I said, we're not going that way. He agreed, good plan. So later, we found the ladder and everything was great. So later I found out what was happening. Inside that area, they were smelting some scrap iron into molten steel. And you had thousands and thousands of volts of electricity that were being transmitted, and there's molten. It's a couple thousand degrees just inside this a little ways. And so I told one of the guys about that. He says, "You didn't go past the wall, did you?" No. That'd be stupid. Well, yeah, I did. He says, you know what? The only reason you're alive is because of your gear. If you didn't have your gear on, you would have been dead right there. So the point I'm making is this is the kind of heat these people are enduring. They're carrying these men up, and all of a sudden the heat was just overwhelming to them. And they could have instantly flashed, caught fire, or whatever, but they're dead. So this is the kind of heat we're talking about. Interesting, it doesn't seem to bother Nebuchadnezzar very much, but anyway, right? But Nebuchadnezzar the king was astounded. He sat up in haste, stood up, and he asked his officials to verify. Weren't there 3 people that were cast into the furnace? Remember, we think it's one of those tall ones with an opening he can see inside. Now, what did he expect to see inside there, do you suppose? Maybe 3 little clumps of charcoal burning, right? No! They're tossed in, completely tied up, and they're walking around. Oh, I just love summer. Don't you love summer? Working on the tan, And, of course, it wasn't all. There was one other individual with him. He sees 4 men walking around. Now, again, it's probably hot enough to melt steel. So we're talking 2,000 plus degrees probably. He verifies 4 are not thrown in. And then he says 1 looks different. How does he describe that different one? Son of the God. Is that what you're going to say, Len? Yeah. What do you suppose that looked like? What would it look like for you, we'll say a pagan, to think there's a son of the gods? What do you think he saw? Daniel. Okay. Bright angel. Good. Bill, is that what you were going to say? Stole your thunder, didn't he? Go ahead, Peggy. Okay, glowing like the sun. Aaron? Exactly. Yeah. Now, like I said, in the refinery, we had these huge furnaces. We didn't have them that hot. They were only like 1,000 degrees. but when you looked inside, you could see the wall, you could see everything. So it all looked red. So that's what it would look like. The 3 men would have looked like that walking around. You'd see these 3 people walking around. They would look really red. You probably couldn't see defining features because of the heat and the waves, the heat waves. But this other figure here, he's not lit from the fire without. He's lit from within. Okay? He's probably shining like the sun. And he's standing out so much that Nebuchadnezzar, who's a complete pagan, who's never seen anything like this before, whoa, this must be what the gods look like. Shining in brilliance. And it kind of reminds me of Paul when he was on the Damascus road. He was walking along the road or riding along the road, and it was during the brightest part of the day, and a light hit him that was so bright it knocked him to the ground. God's glory, God's light far exceeds any light that He's created. And that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing this angel, or a lot of people think it might have been a pre-incarnate Jesus, right there with these 4 men. The only thing that burned was the ropes, and they're just walking around, and there's no big deal, I guess. It's crazy to think about. Nebuchadnezzar realizes this individual's from God, so he calls the 3 men to come out, which there must have been an opening for them to just walk right out. And Nebuchadnezzar has to recognize that he lost the competition. He recognizes the true God, and he's lost the competition. There's no God. He thought there was no God that could deliver these men, and there was one. That just is astonishing. That's why it's such a favorite story for so many people. And there was no negative effect from the fire. The clothing is intact. There's no hair singed. There's not even a smoke smell. When I used to work at the fire department and I'd open the door to go to work in the morning, I could tell right away if there had been a fire that the guys had gone to the previous night because you could smell it in the whole fire station. You could smell a little bit of smoke. These guys came out of the fire and there's no smell of smoke on them at all. There's nothing. They were completely and utterly preserved. Interesting, too, it talks about the people that are investigating them. They're looking at them, And can you imagine them all flocking around these guys and looking and touching the clothing and smelling them? And some of them might have been the very people who were asking for their death in the first place. How might they have felt? Now, Darius, when this happened with Darius in the den of lions, it worked out a little differently, right? The accusers got to share in the penalty. So Nebuchadnezzar didn't throw them into the furnace, but it's very interesting. Let's look at the last part, the epilogue. I'll go ahead and read the last part, verse 28. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who put their trust in him, violating the king's command and yielding up their bodies so as not to serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree that any people, nation, or tongue that speaks anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses reduced to a rubbish heap, inasmuch as there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way." Then the king caused Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to prosper in the province of Babylon. So Nebuchadnezzar gives credit, complete credit to these men's gods. Now, here you are. This person is an absolute ruler, and what has the Lord done to him right now? Humbled him. That's right. He's been humbled. This is the second encounter with God, the first being with a dream vision. We're going to see next week he's going to have another encounter with God, which is going to be even more decisive and more personal than this. But God is working to bring Nebuchadnezzar, I think, to saving faith. There again, the outcome was not certain in this situation. Now, the question I'd like to ask is, were they ever fearful? Were they fearful? They said what they said. They seemed very confident in their words, and they were sincere. I'm not saying that. But when you get tied up and you realize this is really going to happen, this isn't make-believe, do you think they had any fear shoot through them? We want to say no, of course not. But it probably was. I mean, let's face it, even Christians sometimes facing death, we've not done that before, right? I mean, we know Christ. We know we're going to come out on the other side in His presence. We know that. But we've not gone through the process, so that can be kind of scary, especially if you're looking at this furnace, right, with fire coming out the top, and you realize you're going to be one with that, However, what we find is that when people have been martyred or have suffered severely for their faith, usually at that moment, that's when God gives the grace. That's when God gives the courage. He doesn't give you the grace and the courage when you don't need it. He gives it to you when you need it. And then all of a sudden you can be like a Latimer from the Fox's Book of Martyrs who can encourage his co-martyr. I pray that today will light a candle that will burn so bright it'll set the world on fire while they're burning. Okay? God gives the grace at the moment, not before you need it. Did you have something, Bill? Exactly right. The Spirit of God, right. So I'm guessing, as they were carried up, they probably came to terms with it, and yep, we're going to die, and God gives that grace. Of course, they didn't die. However, and then the result of that, in verse 29, we see that Nebuchadnezzar does a complete 180, and now he is guaranteeing freedom of worship to all the Jews. If you even say anything against this God, I'm going to tear you limb from limb and destroy your house. Wow, this guy's given to extremes, right? There's a medication out for that. No, just kidding. But he protection for them when they worship God, and why? Because no other God can deliver this way. And it says in verse 30 that they prospered the king, and that usually carries the idea of a promotion. So the king prospered them through all this. The Jewish religion will be preserved, and in fact, the Babylonians, but especially the Persians, with the exception of the United States, were the most friendly toward the Jews of any other nation. So, in fact, the Persians, which succeeded Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, the Persians were so nice, as it were, or tolerant. Many of them didn't go back to Israel because they were happy where they were. So, anyway, then the question I'd like to ask is, What about the other Jews? There were other Jews, remember? These are the certain Jews. What do you think about the other Jews who obviously bowed down before that image? Who obviously, and they didn't take part in the special diet. Do you think there was a point at which they said to themselves, man, I wish I had the courage these folks had? Do I wish I would have, well, it's too late, right? We need to have the courage and the drive before the event occurs, because it's a little bit late afterwards. Final thoughts. Any takeaways? Bill? Yes. Right. That's true. That's a good point. You're right. Good. He has a little bit of humility, and it's improving. Ann, go ahead. Yes, you're right. Good, excellent. Good. Any others? Joe? Those pesky firefighters. Yeah. What Joe's talking about is when he worked for Boeing, they're doing some tests, and they needed a smoke generator to see how the air flows and whatnot, and the fire department interfered. You know how they are, right? They just love that smoke stuff. Anything else? Anybody else? Okay. Yes, Stephanie. Yes. Oh. Right. What Stephanie's saying is a really good point. She said this did make an impact on Nebuchadnezzar, but not a big enough impact to decide he's going to worship and also tell his other people to worship. He guaranteed freedom of religion for the Jews, but it didn't impact himself per se yet. Linda. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, he did a high five to God, right? Anyone else? Okay. Phil's back there doing me a favor. Thanks, Phil. Thanks, everybody. I sure appreciate it. Let's go ahead and we'll close in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for our time. Thank you for Daniel. Thank you for his three friends, Lord. Thank you for their example. And also that you point out, Lord, that they didn't have capes. They weren't superheroes. They were people just like us. But they had faith in the superhero, and that's you. They trusted in you. And Father, even if you had chosen not to save their lives, they would have entered your presence with thanksgiving because you guaranteed their eternity. Lord, I pray that you would help us to be courageous in our Christian faith. Help us, Lord, to be willing to stand up for you, even if it's not terribly comfortable. I pray that you build that courage up in us, Lord, and also humility, trusting in you. Father, please be with us during the next service. Please be with Pastor Jason. And Father, continue to use him to speak your word with power and with zeal and passion. May we grow in you because of his studies and deliverance of the word. And also, Lord, with the worship team, that you may inhabit the praises of your people and that we might just honor you and have our hearts turned toward you. We thank you for our time. In Jesus' name, amen.